My name is Mara Whitcomb, and I was 32 years old when my mother carried my crutches away from me at Thanksgiving dinner. Not in anger, not in panic, calmly, like she was clearing an extra chair from the room. There were 17 people at that table in my parents' house, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Turkey, sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, 2 pies cooling on the buffet, and my father sitting at the head of it all with his oxygen hidden in the bedroom because he hated looking sick in front of company. My forearm crutches were beside my chair, close enough that I could reach them if I needed to stand. My left leg was locked inside a brace under my black slacks, the kind of detail people only notice when they want to make it mean something. My father, Raymond Whitcomb, pointed at the crutches with his fork and said, "We're done pretending those things mean you're helpless." The room went quiet, but not the kind of quiet that protects you. The kind that waits. Lydia Crane, my mother's church friend, gave a soft little laugh. Funny how young people learn the system before they learn gratitude. My brother Brennan smiled into his drink. Then my mother stood up. Elaine Whitcomb never needed to raise her voice to do damage. She walked around the table, lifted my crutches by the cuffs, and set them against the far wall of the living room. 9 feet away. To most people, 9 feet is nothing. To me, on that floor, after that much standing and sitting and smiling through pain, it might as well have been across a highway. Mom turned back and said, "Crawl if you have to, we're done rewarding the performance." A few people laughed. I put both hands flat on the tablecloth so nobody could see them shake. Then I took out my phone, made one short call, and set it face down beside my untouched plate. 5 minutes, and 42 seconds later, my father's phone rang. He answered smiling. 10 seconds later, the smile was gone. He looked at me across the table and whispered, "Mara, please, don't do this tonight." They thought they had taken away the things that helped me stand. They had no idea I was the one keeping him breathing. Before we begin, please subscribe to support the channel. And here's a fun little challenge. Check your phone battery right now. If it is above 21%, comment 1. If it is below 21%, comment 2. Let's see which answer wins today. If you enjoy this story and would like to support our team, you can buy us a cup of coffee through the link in the description. Every contribution helps us continue creating more meaningful, emotional, and captivating stories for you. Thank you so much for your kindness and support. Now, let's begin the story. Before that call, before my father learned how many parts of his life had my name quietly attached to them, he used to call me his sharp one. That was his phrase. Not sweetheart, not baby girl. My father was not that kind of man. Raymond Whitcomb believed affection should come with a use. If he praised you, it was because you had solved something, carried something, or remembered something he had forgotten, but would never admit forgetting. I was 7 the first time he said it, behind his little mower repair shop outside Lancaster. A riding mower would not start, and Brennan had already wandered off to throw gravel at a fence post. Dad was getting red in the face while the customer waited by his truck pretending not to watch. I had been reading the manual because I liked the diagrams. "The fuel line," I said. 10 minutes later, the mower coughed itself awake. Dad wiped his hands on a rag and told the customer, "That one's my sharp one." I built a whole childhood out of that sentence. After that, I became the kid who knew where everything was. The spare house key under the cracked blue flower pot, the warranty papers in the second drawer, the church donation envelopes in the glove compartment, the date Mom's prescription needed refilling. Brennan forgot things, and people laughed. I forgot things, and the room changed temperature. When Brennan lost a customer invoice, Dad said boys learned by messing up. When I misplaced a receipt, Mom didn't speak to me through dinner. My mother had her own way of teaching that lesson. Elaine Whitcomb was soft-voiced, well-dressed, and dangerous in the way a closed door is dangerous when you are standing on the wrong side of it. She never told me I mattered less. She simply handed me more. A casserole to carry, a form to fill out, a phone call to make, because, as she liked to say, "You explain things better than I do, Mara." But what she meant was, if it goes wrong, it can be yours. By the time I was 12, I knew how to read an insurance statement. By 15, I knew which utility company to call, what account number to read, and what tone to use so my father would not have to sit on hold. In our house, needing help was treated like a bad habit, and asking twice was almost a sin. Every once in a while, when I got it right, Dad would tap 2 fingers against the kitchen table and say, "That's my sharp one." I should have known love was not supposed to feel like passing a test. The first time I understood what that lesson had cost me was in February of 2023, on a back stairwell behind the senior center where I worked. It was one of those Pennsylvania mornings that looked wet instead of frozen until your shoe found the ice. I had stayed late after a benefits workshop because a box of client intake forms had been left in the storage room, and I was still the person who went back for things other people forgot. I remember the metal railing under my palm. I remember the cardboard edge against my hip. Then I remember the fourth step disappearing. People think pain arrives as a scream. Mine arrived as sound first. The box splitting open, papers sliding down concrete, my own breath leaving me in a hard, ugly shape. For a few seconds, I could not make my left leg answer me. Not move. Not bend. Not even feel like it belonged to the rest of my body. A custodian, named Mr. Bell, found me sitting halfway down the stairs with intake forms scattered around me like snow, telling him I was fine because that was still the language I knew. The doctors used careful words. Nerve trauma, partial mobility loss, chronic instability. They showed me diagrams and said recovery would not be a straight line. I would have good days. I would have bad days. I might stand at a counter for 3 minutes on Monday and need both crutches to cross a room on Tuesday. The first time they handed me forearm crutches, I hated how official they looked. A brace would help. Rest would help. What would not help was pretending my body had to behave consistently just to make other people comfortable. My friend Nola Keene understood that before I did. She was an occupational therapist, the kind of woman who could adjust a brace with one hand and tell the truth with the other. During one session, after I admitted my family kept asking why I could walk from the couch to the sink but not across a grocery store, she tightened the strap below my knee and said, "People see your good days and use them as evidence against your bad ones." I laughed because I thought she was being dramatic. She was not. My parents heard the explanations. They sat in the room when the specialist told us I was not faking. My mother nodded with her church face on. My father crossed his arms and looked at the wall. For a few weeks, they were careful. Then they started collecting proof against me. If I stood long enough to pour coffee, Dad would say, "Looks like the leg works today." If I brought my crutches into a restaurant, Mom would whisper, "Do you need to make it so obvious?" Brennan called it convenient, like pain was a schedule I controlled. The worst moment came in their kitchen that summer. I had braced one hand on the counter and stood for maybe 8 seconds to reach my medication. 8 seconds. My left foot was already shaking inside the brace. Dad saw me from the doorway and called to my mother. "Told you. She can walk when she wants to." I sat down before my knee gave out, swallowed the pill dry, and said nothing. That was when I learned the truth would not save me just because they had heard it. They had to want it, and they did not. Then, in September of 2024, my father started running out of air. That is the simplest way I can say it. At first, he called it a cough, then allergies. Then the weather, the humidity, the dust from the shop, the neighbor's leaf blower, anything except what it was. Raymond Whitcomb could diagnose a mower from one bad turn of the engine, but he could not admit his own lungs were failing while he was still inside them. My mother called me on a Thursday morning, not because she was ready to ask for help, but because she wanted me to make help look unnecessary. "Your father has an appointment," she said. "Nothing serious." By then, I knew the translation. Nothing serious meant, bring a notebook. I met them at the pulmonary clinic outside Lancaster at 10:20, and Dad was already angry at the waiting room, because everyone in it looked like a future he refused to enter. There were men with portable tanks, women with walkers, a man in a Phillies cap coughing into a folded tissue. My father looked at all of them like weakness was contagious. The doctor was kind, which made him worse. She said COPD, oxygen saturation, nighttime concentrator, rescue inhaler, maintenance inhaler, pulmonary rehab, home health check-ins. She said he needed to stop treating breath like stubbornness could manufacture more of it. My mother nodded with the careful face she used in public. Brennan was not there. He had a customer coming to look at a used Silverado, which apparently ranked higher than learning how his father was supposed to breathe. So I took notes. I wrote down the oxygen supplier, the after-hours number, the delivery schedule, the nurse's name, the difference between the inhaler he used every morning and the one he used when his chest tightened. The doctor warned us about keeping a backup concentrator in the house because winter storms knock power out in that part of Pennsylvania often enough to matter. Dad watched my pen move and said, "Don't make a project out of me." I said, "I'm trying to keep you out of the hospital." He looked away. That afternoon I became the person on every form. Authorized care contact, billing backup, emergency notification, online account manager. Janice Rowe was the home health nurse. Late 50s, gray braid, no-nonsense shoes, the kind of woman who could make a man like my father sit down without raising her voice. She liked him more than he deserved. She liked my mother less than my mother knew. With me, she was direct. "Your dad skipped his morning inhaler again," she texted once. Another time, "He says the oxygen makes him look old. Tell him being blue around the lips looks worse." So I called. I reminded. I scheduled. I smoothed things over. I learned the passcodes. I found the discount program for the concentrator rental. I put my own card down for the uncovered charges after my mother said they would look at it later, and the supplier warned the account would be paused without payment. It was $620 a month at first, sometimes a little more. Not enough to ruin me all at once. Just enough to make me postpone fixing things in my own apartment. No one asked who paid it. That was the trick of invisible work. If it happened smoothly, people assumed it cost nothing. If my father had oxygen at night, if Janice arrived on time, if the pharmacy had the right authorization, if the bill did not sit on my mother's counter making her anxious, then the system was working. And if the system was working, no one had to wonder who was holding it together. Dad told people Brennan was helping him through a rough patch. He said it at church. He said it to Uncle Mercer. He said it once while I was standing beside him, holding a folder with his medication list inside it. "My boy's been stepping up," he said. I remember my fingers tightening around that folder until the paper bent. I could have corrected him. I did not. Some part of me was still waiting for my father to turn his head, see what I was carrying, and remember who I was. Brennan did not need to understand the system to benefit from it. He only needed to arrive after the hard parts were done, stand in the right patch of light, and let people believe the story they already preferred. He was 38, broad-shouldered, loud in the way some men are when nobody has asked them a difficult question. He sold used trucks at a dealership outside Lancaster and talked about loyalty like it was something printed on a bumper sticker. His visits had a pattern. He came late on Sunday afternoons, usually after Janice had already left, and after I had checked the pill organizer, the oxygen tubing, and the stack of mail my mother refused to open. He would clap Dad on the shoulder, ask how the old man was holding up, take a picture, and leave before the coffee cooled. 10 minutes, sometimes 12. Once, when there was a football game on, 21, then the post would appear. Taking care of the old man. Family first. A photo of Brennan beside Dad's recliner. A photo of Brennan holding a grocery bag I had dropped off an hour earlier. A photo of Brennan standing near the oxygen concentrator like he knew what to do when it started beeping after midnight. People loved those pictures. Church ladies left praying hands. Old high school friends wrote, "Good man." Lydia Crane commented almost every time. "Your parents raised a good son." My mother liked every post. I saw one of them from the parking lot of Miller's Pharmacy, sitting in my car with my left leg throbbing under the brace, and a paper bag of my father's inhalers I had just paid for on the passenger seat. The caption said, "Some things you do because it's family, not because anyone sees." I stared at that sentence until the screen dimmed. Then Janice texted me, "Mara, his oxygen dipped again this morning. Can you call when you're free?" I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because if I did not laugh, I was going to make a sound I could not take back. That summer, Elaine started repeating the lie out loud. At the church picnic in July, under a white tent behind the fellowship hall, she told 3 women from her prayer circle that Brennan had been such a rock through Dad's breathing trouble. I was 6 feet away, balancing a paper plate against my hip, because there were no chairs left close to the shade. Lydia put one hand over her heart and said, "A son like that is a blessing." At that exact moment, my phone buzzed with a message from Janice. "Your dad says he's skipping rehab tomorrow. Please talk sense into him." I looked at my mother. She was smiling. Brennan was across the lawn lifting a cooler into someone's trunk, and half the tent clapped like he had just carried a man out of a burning building. Nobody noticed me step behind the church van to call my father. That was how it worked. Brennan performed care. I performed care. Only one of those things photographed well. The numbers still sit in my head, because numbers are harder to gaslight than feelings. In 16 months, Janice Rowe never once coordinated with Brennan. Not once. He was not on the supplier account. He was not on the pharmacy notes. He was not in the rehab portal. He could pose beside the machine, but he could not have told you what the blinking yellow light meant. I told myself I was being petty. I told myself Dad was sick, Mom was scared, and Brennan was careless, not cruel. I told myself that correcting the story would make me look bitter, and bitter daughters do not get believed. So I kept the receipts in a folder on my laptop, and kept my mouth shut in rooms where people praised my brother for work my body was paying for. The closest I came to breaking was a Tuesday night in August. Dad's backup concentrator had not arrived, and a storm was moving in from the west. I spent 43 minutes on hold with the supplier, then another 18 with the insurance line, sitting on my kitchen floor because my leg hurt too much to stay at the table. When I finally got the authorization pushed through, my phone lit up with a new post from Brennan. It was a picture of him and Dad giving a thumbs up. Caption: "Got him covered." I looked around my apartment, at the loose bathroom rail. I still had not fixed the stack of bills I was rotating by due date, the bag of frozen peas melting against my knee. Then I looked at my brother's smile on that screen. For a second, I wanted to answer publicly. Covered by who, Brennan? Name the company. Name the nurse. Name one medication. But I did not, because some part of me still believed that if I stayed quiet long enough, the truth would become too heavy for them to ignore. I did not understand yet that silence does not make a lie collapse. Sometimes it gives the lie room to decorate. Thanksgiving came with the kind of cold that makes old houses sound awake. The windows clicked in their frames. The porch boards complained under every footstep. I almost did not go. I sat in my car, outside my apartment, with both hands on the steering wheel, my crutches laid across the passenger seat, telling myself I could still turn the engine off and stay where nobody needed me to prove anything. Then Penny called. Brennan's daughter was 8, all front teeth and questions, and she whispered like she was hiding in a closet. "Aunt Mara, I saved you the cranberry seat." That was what she called the chair near the end of the table, because one year I had knocked cranberry sauce into my lap there and laughed before anyone else could. I looked at my crutches, at the gray sky above the parking lot, and hated how quickly one small, innocent voice could still pull me back. My parents' house looked the same from the outside. Brick front, narrow porch, fake harvest wreath on the door that my mother changed by season like proof of stability. Uncle Mercer met me before I could reach the steps. He did not make a production of it. He just opened the storm door, looked at my crutches, and said, "Take your time, kid." That was all. No pity. No sermon about strength. just enough room to enter without being watched like a problem. Inside, the house smelled like turkey skin, coffee, and Elaine's cinnamon candles. The television murmured from the den. Coats were stacked on the guest bed. Lydia Crane was in the kitchen, though she was not family, wearing a cream sweater and carrying a casserole like it gave her voting rights. She glanced at my crutches first, then at my face, and smiled with only the polite part of her mouth. I noticed the envelope before anyone said anything. It was half tucked behind the pie plates on the buffet. White, thick, with my name written across the front in my mother's careful church handwriting. Under my name were 2 words: benefit review. Elaine saw me looking and turned it over so fast the serving spoon beside it rattled. Church paperwork, she said. Nothing for you. Lydia's eyes flicked toward it, and that was when I understood it was not church paperwork at all. Brennan came in from the garage, with a beer already open and a grin already working. He leaned close to Dad at the head of the table and said, low enough that most people missed it but not low enough for me, "After pie, Dad. Don't start before pie." My father coughed into his napkin and nodded once, like they had rehearsed patience. Lydia heard it too. She smiled down into her casserole dish like she already knew her line. I looked toward the hallway where his portable oxygen should have been. It was not beside his chair. It was not under the side table. They had hidden it in the bedroom again, because needing help was shameful unless the help could be made invisible. I almost reminded him what the doctor had said about holiday stress, long meals, and cold air. But the room was warm. Penny was humming under the table. Uncle Mercer was talking about Wyoming in a snowstorm in 1978. My mother placed rolls into a basket like nothing in the world was wrong. My father sat at the head of the table, pretending breath was still something he could command. Lydia waited. Brennan watched. And I sat there with my crutches beside my chair, close enough to reach, not yet understanding that the warmth in that room was only the pause before they tried to take them from me. Before a family breaks you in public, it often lets you feel safe just long enough to make the breaking look like your fault. Lydia did not wait for pie. That was the thing about people like her. They could smell a room leaning toward cruelty, and they always wanted to be the first one to push. I had asked Penny to pass the water pitcher because it was just beyond my reach, and before the child could lift it, Lydia gave a soft laugh. "Funny," she said, looking at my hands, then at my crutches. "She can manage paperwork for everybody, but not a water pitcher." Brennan smiled, like he had been waiting all afternoon for permission. "Careful, Lydia," he said. "She'll file a complaint." A few people chuckled. Not everyone. Uncle Mercer looked up from his plate. Penny froze with both hands around the pitcher. My father set his fork down slowly, and the sound of silver against china seemed to pull the whole table into silence. He looked at me, then at my crutches, like they had personally insulted him. "Stand up," he said. Just 2 words. No shouting. No warning. I felt my throat close before I felt anything else. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "You know I can't cross this room without support." His mouth tightened. "I worked 40 years with bad lungs and bad knees," he said. "I never built a personality around it." Across the table, Elaine folded her napkin. That was how I knew this had not surprised her. My mother stood, calmly. That was the part I remember most. She walked around the table as if she were refilling coffee, wrapped one hand around each forearm cuff, and lifted my crutches away from my chair. For one strange second, I thought she was moving them closer. Then she carried them across the living room and leaned them against the far wall. 9 feet. A small distance for most people. A border for me. She turned back with the same face she used when arranging flowers at church. "Crawl if you have to," she said. "We're done rewarding the performance." The room held its breath, then Lydia laughed. Brennan laughed after her, louder, because he always needed witnesses. Someone near the end of the table muttered, "Come on, Mara, don't make Thanksgiving weird." Penny stared at her plate. Uncle Mercer's chair scraped an inch, then stopped. I kept both hands flat on the tablecloth. Under my brace, my left leg had started its electric tremor, that warning pulse before it turned unreliable. I knew what they wanted. They wanted me on the floor. They wanted proof they could photograph with their eyes and repeat later as a story. The faker finally exposed, the difficult daughter finally crawling. I looked at my crutches against the wall and understood that explaining would only feed the performance. "You're right," I said, and the laughter thinned because my voice did not sound broken. Nobody should have to perform pain for family. Then I took out my phone and dialed the after-hours number I knew by heart. When the operator answered, I used the voice I used at work, steady and clear. "This is Mara Whitcomb, authorized care coordinator for Raymond Whitcomb. I'm withdrawing as unpaid family coordinator, effective immediately." Brennan snorted, "Calling your disability lawyer?" I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the pattern of the tablecloth and continued. "Please transfer all oxygen delivery, nurse confirmations, billing questions, and authorization calls to the household contact. If there is no household contact, the family will need to assign one tonight. He still needs care. I am not canceling care. I am only removing myself as the unpaid coordinator." Then I hung up, set the phone face down beside my plate, and waited. No one moved for the first minute. That is what I remember. Not the laughter, not even my mother's face. The stillness. 17 people in a warm dining room, and not one of them reached for the crutches leaning against the far wall. My father had just demanded proof that I could stand. My mother had just taken away the tools that let me do it safely, and the room decided to wait and see what happened next. Brennan broke first, because silence made him uncomfortable when he was not controlling it. "So dramatic," he said. But his voice did not land the way he wanted. Lydia picked up her fork and set it down again. My mother stayed standing near the end of the table, one hand on the back of Penny's chair, her mouth pressed into the thin line she used when a situation had not followed the script. 5 minutes is not long, unless everyone is waiting for something only you understand." I watched the clock over the doorway. The second hand moved with a little hitch, like even time was limping through that room. My father tried to go back to his plate, but he could not make himself lift the fork. His breathing had changed. Not enough for anyone else to notice, maybe, but I heard it. I always heard it. Then his phone rang. It buzzed against the table beside his glass, loud enough to make Penny flinch. Dad looked at the screen, frowned, and answered with the last bit of authority he had left. "This is Raymond Whitcomb." He listened. At first, his face was irritated, the way it got when a cashier asked for an email address. Then his eyebrows pulled together. "Who?" he said. Another pause. "Darren? From the oxygen place?" My mother's eyes went to me. So did Brennan's. I kept my hands folded beside my untouched plate. The room could hear only my father's half of the conversation, but that was enough. "No, she's right here," he said. "What do you mean she removed herself?" He looked at me then, not like a father looking at a daughter, but like a man looking for the switch that had turned the lights off. Darren Pike must have started listing things, because my father's confidence began leaving in pieces. Oxygen delivery needed confirmation before Monday. The backup concentrator authorization had not been completed under the new household contact. The hardship discount would have to be re-signed. Janice's next home health visit needed someone to verify access. Billing questions could no longer go through my account. If no household contact was assigned, the file would move to self-pay review. Dad put a hand over the phone. "Elaine," he said, trying to sound calm. "What's the passcode for the oxygen account?" My mother blinked. "Once. Twice. I don't know. Mara always handled that." She said it before she understood what she had admitted. Brennan shifted in his chair. Dad looked at him. "Do you know the company name?" Brennan opened his mouth, then glanced toward Lydia, then closed it. The air in that room changed. Not because they felt sorry. Not yet. It changed because the story they had been telling had run into a locked door. My father uncovered the phone. "Can't you just speak with my wife?" he asked. He listened. "No. I understand she doesn't have the passcode, but I'm the patient." Another pause. His voice dropped. What deposit? That word did what pain had not done. It scared him. Deposit meant money that could not be hidden behind my bank card. Self-pay meant the invisible work was about to become a bill on my mother's counter. Backup concentrator meant the machine he pretended not to need might not be there when the winter power flickered. Suddenly, the crutches against the wall were not the most fragile thing in the house. My father looked across the table at me. "Why are you the only name they have?" he asked. There was anger in it, but underneath the anger was something smaller. Fear. I could have answered. I could have given him the list right there, because I filled out the forms, because I answered the calls, because I paid what you ignored, because Brennan took pictures and I took responsibility. I said nothing. The silence did what my explanations never had. Dad listened again, then swallowed hard. When he spoke, his voice was no longer for the room. It was for me. "Mara," he whispered, "please. Don't do this tonight." And there it was. The word please. Not for the daughter whose crutches were still 9 feet away. Not for the woman he had just asked to humiliate herself on the floor. He was pleading with the coordinator, the account holder, the person who knew how to keep his oxygen coming. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at Uncle Mercer. "Would you bring me my crutches, please?" I asked. Mercer stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. This time he did not stop. He crossed the room, picked up my crutches, and brought them back without looking at my mother. I fitted my arms into the cuffs slowly, carefully, because my leg was shaking and I would not give that room a fall to remember. Then I stood. Nobody laughed this time. Black Friday morning arrived, without any of the drama my mother had accused me of creating. No thunder, no collapse. Just a gray sky, leftover turkey in plastic containers, and a house full of people who suddenly had to learn the names of things they had been using for 16 months. I know because Elaine called me 7 times before 9 a.m. I did not answer. Then Brennan texted, "What's Dad's oxygen company called? And what meds does he take? Just send the list." I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand and read that message 4 times. Not because it confused me, because it was the cleanest confession he had ever given me. The devoted son, the one with 29 posts and 100 praying hands beneath them, did not know the company that helped his father breathe. He did not know the medications. He did not even know enough to be embarrassed before asking me. I did not send the list. I need that understood. Not because I wanted my father unsafe. Before I left that Thanksgiving table, I had made sure the agency knew he still needed care and that the family had to assign a new household contact. Emergency services were still available. Oxygen was not being ripped from the house. I had not become cruel. I had simply stopped being the shortcut everyone used, so they never had to become responsible. By noon, the system started teaching them. Elaine could not get through verification because she did not know the passcode. She did not know the account email. She called the delivery number when she needed clinical support and the clinical number when she needed billing. Janice Rowe left a voicemail saying no one had confirmed her next visit, and she could not keep rearranging her schedule around a family that would not answer basic questions. The first bill landed that afternoon by email and mail both, because that is how unpaid systems announce themselves when the invisible card disappears. $1,940.73. Pending balance, missed confirmation fee, equipment deposit review. My mother sent me a screenshot with no apology attached, just a sentence. "What did you do?" I looked at it while sitting on the edge of my bed, my brace loosened, my leg pulsing from the night before. What did I do? I had let the cost of their life arrive at the correct address. That was all. My father left one voicemail at 4:18 p.m. His breathing was rough, but his voice was angry enough to lean on. "Mara, we need to talk about the oxygen," he said. Not the crutches, not the table, not the word crawl. The oxygen. And that was when the last hopeful part of me finally went quiet. By Saturday, my mother had found a new story to tell. She was good at that. Elaine Whitcomb could take a room full of facts and arrange them into something that made her look wounded. In the family group chat, she wrote that I had chosen Thanksgiving to punish a sick man. She said I had always been sensitive. She said the whole thing had been a misunderstanding, and that I had embarrassed my father in front of guests. For a few hours, it worked. Cousin Marla sent a sad face emoji. Someone else wrote, "Family is complicated." Lydia Crane, who was not even in the family chat but somehow saw everything by dinner, called my mother and then told 3 women from church that I had withdrawn care, because people had finally questioned my crutches. That phrase traveled fast. Withdrawn care. It sounded cleaner than what really happened. It made me sound dangerous instead of tired. Then Uncle Mercer asked one question. He typed it at 8:17 that night, and I know the time because I stared at the screen like it had opened a window. If Brennan handles Ray's care, why is everybody asking Mara for the oxygen information? Nobody answered for 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a long time in a family that usually corrects the truth before it gets comfortable. My mother tried to steer it. Mara has always kept her own system, she wrote. That's part of the problem. But she had used the wrong word, system. Once it was sitting there, everyone could see there had been one. A system with passcodes, schedules, payments, nurse visits, authorizations, and delivery confirmations. A system does not build itself by being dramatic. It gets built by someone answering the phone over and over, until nobody notices the phone ringing anymore. Mercer did something I did not expect. He called Janice Rowe. I had not asked him to. I would not have dared. But Janice had no patience for family theater, especially after spending 16 months watching it from the doorway. She told him plainly, and he put her words in the chat with her permission. I have coordinated with Mara every week. I have never once coordinated with Brennan. I have never met Brennan during a care visit. Those 2 sentences changed the temperature. Not all at once. Families do not surrender lies quickly. They loosen their grip finger by finger. First Marla asked, "Wait, never?" Then Aunt Elise asked who had been paying the uncovered charges. Someone else asked why Elaine did not know the passcode if Brennan was helping. Lydia tried to rescue the room from outside it, texting my mother something that somehow got forwarded back. Some people help spiritually. Mercer answered before I could even decide whether to laugh. Spiritual help doesn't refill an oxygen tank. I read that line in my kitchen and sat down because my leg was aching and because, for once, I was not the one holding the truth up by myself. Brennan did not post that night. My mother stopped replying. And somewhere between the bill, Janice's statement, and one old man with enough decency to ask the obvious question, the story they had decorated for months began to peel off the wall. By Sunday, December 7, I stopped waiting for the truth to leak out on its own. Leaks can be patched. Stories can be redirected. My mother had lived her whole adult life redirecting rooms before anyone noticed where the water was coming from. So I asked them to meet after church, at my parents' house, in the same dining room where my crutches had been carried away. I did not ask for permission. I sent one message. We need to talk about Dad's care, Brennan's role, and what happened at Thanksgiving. I brought a folder, not because paper makes you brave, but because paper does not shake when people lie to it. Uncle Mercer had put a temporary ramp over the front step before I arrived. He did not say anything about it. He just opened the door and stepped aside. My father was in his recliner by the window, thinner than he had looked 9 days earlier. My mother stood behind him with one hand on the chair, like she could still steer the room from there. Brennan came with Kayla, his wife, looking annoyed and underinformed. Lydia sat near the buffet, of course. I started with the simplest thing. Dates. 16 months of oxygen deliveries. Janice's visit schedule. Pharmacy calls. Insurance authorizations. The $620 monthly charges from my own card. I laid them out one at a time, not dramatically, just clearly. My mother tried to interrupt before the second page. "This is humiliating," she said. I looked at her and said, "No, humiliating was 9 feet away against the living room wall. This is documentation." Brennan made a sound like a laugh. So what, you kept a little spreadsheet, he said. That doesn't mean I didn't help. Uncle Mercer turned toward him slowly. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse. Name one inhaler your father uses, he said. Just one. Brennan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at my mother, then at Lydia, then at the floor. Kayla's face changed first. She had married the story too, and now she was watching her husband fail the easiest question in the room. Janice was there because Mercer had asked her, and because she said truth should not always have to come from the person being punished for it. She stood near the doorway, in her no-nonsense shoes, and said, I've worked with this family for 16 months. Mara is the only adult child I have coordinated with. Brennan has never been present for a care visit I attended. Lydia muttered, There are different kinds of support. Janice looked at her. Not for oxygen, there aren't. My mother sat down then. Not because she was sorry, because there was nowhere left to stand without standing on a lie. I placed Brennan's text on the table next, the one asking for the company name and medication list, then the screenshots of his posts. 29 pictures, 29 captions, 29 little monuments to work. He had not done. No one spoke for a long moment. My father stared at the papers like they belonged to someone else's family. Then I said the thing I had come to say. You did not mock my crutches, because you thought I was lying. You mocked them because you needed me to be lying. Because if I was really hurt, then you had to admit the person holding this family together was the same person you kept pushing to the floor. My father closed his eyes. My mother looked away. Brennan said nothing. For once, silence did not belong to them. It belonged to me. My father did not apologize that day. Not in the way I used to dream about when I was younger, and still believed the right sentence could repair the wrong years. He sat in that recliner with his hands folded over his stomach, looking smaller than the man who had told me to stand up. So what happens now? He asked. His voice was not angry anymore. That should have felt like a victory. It did not. It felt like finding a house after the fire and realizing quiet is not the same thing as peace. What happens now, I said, is that you get professional care. I had already made the calls. A licensed agency would take over coordination, oxygen confirmations, nurse schedules, billing, and emergency contacts. My parents would be listed as the payers. The agency would be listed as the coordinator. My name would not sit at the top of every form like a handle everyone could grab when they wanted something. The monthly cost was $2,350. My mother made a small sound when I said it. I did not look at her. I'm not leaving you without care, I told my father. But I am no longer the care you get to insult for free. Nobody argued. Maybe they were tired. Maybe the papers on the table had made denial too expensive. Brennan stared at his phone without touching it. Lydia left before the meeting was over, carrying her casserole dish like a shield. Janice gave me one short nod from the doorway. Uncle Mercer walked me to the porch and said, You did what needed doing. I believed him more than I expected to. After that, the story did not explode. It settled. That is what people never understand about endings. The loud part is not always the last part. Brennan stopped posting pictures with Dad. My mother stopped bringing my name into church conversations she could not control. The bills arrived at the correct house, under the correct names. My father still had oxygen, he still had nurses. He still had people checking on him. He just no longer had me disappearing the cost before anyone had to see it. I did not go back for Christmas that year. I sent Penny a birthday card in February with a little fox on the front and $20 tucked inside. I wrote, This was never about you, sweetheart. I am always your Aunt Mara. She mailed me a drawing of the two of us sitting under a red tree. In the picture, my crutches were purple. I kept it on my fridge. The money I used to spend making my parents' life look easier, I spent making my own life possible. A grab bar in the bathroom, a lower kitchen shelf, a better chair by the door where I could take off my brace without balancing on one tired leg. Small things, human things. The first night everything was installed, I sat in my quiet apartment and cried harder than I had cried at Thanksgiving. They told me to crawl to prove I was telling the truth, but the truth never needed me on the floor. It only needed me to stop holding up people who kept kicking away my crutches. The lesson I took from all of it was not that family is worthless. It was not that love should be measured in invoices, appointment logs, or who remembers which inhaler is blue. Life is not that simple. The lesson was quieter than that, and harder to accept. Love that only sees you when you are useful is not love you can safely build a life around. For years, I thought being needed meant being cherished. I thought if I answered every call, paid every quiet bill, remembered every password, and swallowed every insult, someone would finally look at me and say, "I see what you carry." But some people do not see sacrifice as love. They see it as a service they are entitled to. And the longer you provide it without boundaries, the more shocked they become when you finally say, "No more." Family should be the place where your pain does not have to perform for a jury. You should not have to crawl across a floor, empty your bank account, or break your own body just to prove you are loyal. Real love does not demand that you disappear so someone else can stay comfortable. Real love makes room for your limits. It does not mock the tools that help you survive. And resilience is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is not revenge. Sometimes it is not shouting the truth in a room full of people who denied it. Sometimes resilience is making one phone call, removing your name from the list, letting the bill go where it belongs, fixing your own bathroom rail, buying the chair that fits your body, sending a birthday card to the child who did nothing wrong, choosing peace without becoming cruel. If this story reached something in you, maybe it is because you have been the invisible person too. The one who kept everything running while someone else took the credit. The one who was called difficult the moment you stopped making life easy for people who never thanked you. If that is you, I hope you remember this. Setting down what was never yours to carry is not betrayal. Sometimes it is the first honest act of love you give yourself. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and tell me, when did you finally stop explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you?